In the center of the city stood a huge abandoned toy factory, Playtime Company. It had been deserted for decades, its walls covered in graffiti, windows boarded up, and entrance doors nailed shut. Despite its neglected appearance, the factory always attracted teenagers and thrill seekers. It was said that an evil resided within its walls, and the factory's main toy, Huggy Wuggy, was its embodiment. One autumn day, a group of teenagers, Mike, Jenna, and Liam, decided to sneak into the abandoned factory to prove they weren't afraid of old urban legends. They climbed through a broken window and found themselves in a dark, dusty corridor. The air was filled with a musty smell, and each step echoed through the empty halls. Walking down the corridor, they came across an old storeroom where unsold toys were stored. Among the dust and cobwebs, Huggy Wuggy, a huge blue monster with a wide, toothy grin and enormous eyes, sat on a shelf. Jenna approached it and said with a smile, "Look, it's just a toy, nothing scary." Suddenly, the lights in the storeroom flickered, and Mike felt a chill run down his spine. Liam suggested they leave, but Jenna insisted on staying and exploring further. As they went deeper into the factory, they started hearing strange noises, quiet laughter and rustling, as if someone was moving nearby. The sounds grew louder, and soon they realized they were coming from different corners of the room. The teenagers grew nervous but kept moving forward. When they entered the main production hall, the lights went out completely. In the total darkness, they heard Liam scream. When the lights came back on, Liam was gone. Mike and Jenna were terrified. They searched the entire room but found no trace of their friend. Only his jacket remained on the floor, and next to it lay Huggy Wuggy, its grin even wider, its eyes gleaming in the dim light. Mike and Jenna realized something sinister was happening in the factory. They decided to run, but the doors they had entered through were locked. Suddenly, Huggy Wuggy disappeared, and they heard its footsteps approaching from the dark corridor. The toy was moving faster, its sinister laughter growing louder. Mike and Jenna ran into one of the old offices and barricaded the door. Jenna was trembling with fear, while Mike tried to find a way out. Suddenly, they heard a whisper coming from an old radio. "You shouldn't have come here. Now you are mine." The office door began to slowly open, and Mike realized their time was up. He found an old ventilation shaft and helped Jenna crawl inside, saying he would cover her. Jenna started crawling but heard Mike scream. She looked back and saw Huggy Wuggy wrapping its long blue arms around Mike, its grin terrifying. Jenna crawled through the ventilation shaft, her heart pounding in her chest. She heard Huggy Wuggy approaching. Finally, she emerged onto the factory roof and ran to the edge. She looked back and saw Huggy Wuggy climbing out of the ventilation shaft, its eyes burning with malice. Jenna jumped off the roof, hoping to escape, but fell onto the concrete and broke her leg. She tried to crawl, but knew she wouldn't get far. Huggy Wuggy was slowly approaching, its footsteps echoing through the empty factory yard. The last thing Jenna saw was Huggy Wuggy's smiling face before darkness consumed her. Playtime Company was once again empty, and now no one dared to approach it, knowing that within its walls resided the sinister spirit of Huggy Wuggy, who did not forgive those who dared to disturb its rest. In a small town surrounded by dense forests, there was an abandoned toy factory called Playtime Company. The factory had long since closed after a series of unexplained incidents and tragic events. The factory's main toy was Huggy Wuggy, a huge plush monster with bright blue hands, a wide toothy grin, and eerily expressive eyes. Anna and her family moved into an old house on the outskirts of the town, which had once belonged to her grandfather. Her grandfather worked at the factory and often told scary stories about how the toys would come to life at night. One day, while sorting through the basement, Anna came across an old box labeled Huggy Wuggy. Inside lay the very monster from her grandfather's stories. Anna decided to leave the toy in her son Tom's room, who was thrilled with his new friend. But on the very first night, strange things began to happen. Anna woke up to a loud noise and ran to Tom's room. The boy was peacefully asleep, and Huggy Wuggy was sitting on the floor, even though she distinctly remembered leaving it on the shelf. She picked up the toy and put it back in its place. Every night, Tom started waking up screaming. He said that Huggy Wuggy whispered scary things to him and tried to take him away. Anna dismissed it as nightmares, but her worry grew. One night, when the screams became unbearable, she decided to set up a camera in her son's room. The next morning, Anna reviewed the footage. Her blood ran cold. The video showed Huggy Wuggy slowly getting off the shelf, crawling onto the floor, and creeping towards Tom's bed. It stopped at the foot of the bed, its eyes gleaming in the dark. Anna heard a quiet, sinister whisper that made her heart stop. "Tonight." That night, Anna decided to stay awake. She sat in a chair in her son's room, holding a flashlight. Time passed slowly, and when the clock struck midnight, she heard a quiet creak. Huggy Wuggy had come to life again. He slowly turned his head towards Anna and smiled even wider. His eyes gleamed with malice. Anna jumped up and aimed the flashlight at the toy, but the light didn't stop it. Huggy Wuggy began moving faster, heading straight for her. Anna screamed and tried to grab the toy, but her hands passed through the soft plush. The toy was becoming more and more material, its eyes glowing blood red. Tom woke up to his mother's screams and saw Huggy Wuggy wrapping its long arms around her. The toy squeezed tighter and tighter, and Anna felt her consciousness slipping away. The last thing she saw was Huggy Wuggy's smile and a voice coming from nowhere. "Now you are mine, forever." In the morning, neighbors, alarmed by the night's screams, burst into the house and found Tom sitting on the bed, staring at the motionless Huggy Wuggy. There was no sign of Anna. She was never seen again. Huggy Wuggy was back on the shelf, its smile even wider and its eyes even more sinister. Since then, the house became known as cursed, and Huggy Wuggy as the toy that takes souls. No one dared to enter that house, fearing to encounter the one who dwells in the shadows of the night.
In a bustling town, there was a popular McDonald's where people of all ages came to enjoy their meals and spend time with friends and family. The bright, cheerful atmosphere masked an eerie secret that had recently begun to surface, a sinister presence that stalked the patrons. The whispers of Huggy Wuggy, a monstrous blue toy with a wide, toothy grin and enormous, haunting eyes, started to circulate among the locals. It all began one Friday evening when a young boy named Billy was celebrating his birthday at McDonald's with his family. The party was in full swing when Billy noticed a large blue toy sitting on a bench in the corner of the play area. It was Huggy Wuggy. Fascinated, Billy approached the toy. Moments later, he was nowhere to be found. His parents and friends searched frantically, but there was no sign of him. The only clue left behind was Huggy Wuggy, now sitting in a different spot, its eyes gleaming ominously. Over the next few weeks, more children and even a few adults vanished from the McDonald's and nearby locations. Each time, witnesses reported seeing Huggy Wuggy nearby just before the disappearances. The town was gripped by fear, and the McDonald's staff decided to close the play area, but the disappearances continued. Desperate to solve the mystery, a group of friends, Jack, Sarah, Mike, and Emily, decided to take matters into their own hands. They met at McDonald's late one night, determined to uncover the truth. They set up cameras and kept a close watch on the play area, hoping to catch a glimpse of Huggy Wuggy in action. As midnight approached, the restaurant grew eerily quiet. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and a cold wind swept through the building. The friends watched in horror as Huggy Wuggy slowly emerged from the shadows. Its grin seemed wider, and its eyes glowed with malevolence. Huggy Wuggy moved swiftly, gliding silently across the floor toward a young girl who had stayed behind with her parents. Jack and Mike rushed to intercept the toy, but their hands passed right through it as if it were a ghost. Huggy Wuggy turned its attention to them, and for the first time, it spoke in a chilling whisper, "You shouldn't have come here." The friends felt a wave of cold fear wash over them as they realized Huggy Wuggy was not just a toy but a malevolent entity. They ran toward the exit, but the doors slammed shut with a deafening bang. Huggy Wuggy was now chasing them, its laughter echoing through the empty restaurant. Jack, Sarah, Mike, and Emily ran into the kitchen, hoping to find a way out. They barricaded the door and tried to call for help, but their phones had no signal. The lights flickered again, and they heard Huggy Wuggy's footsteps approaching. The door began to creak open, and Huggy Wuggy's sinister face appeared in the gap. Thinking quickly, Mike grabbed a kitchen knife and lunged at Huggy Wuggy, but the knife passed through it, leaving Mike defenseless. Huggy Wuggy reached out with its long, plush arms, wrapping them around Mike and pulling him into its cold embrace. Mike screamed as he vanished, leaving only his phone behind. Terrified, Jack, Sarah, and Emily ran through the maze of the kitchen, looking for any way to escape. They found a ventilation shaft and quickly crawled inside, hoping it would lead them out. As they crawled through the narrow ducts, they could hear Huggy Wuggy's laughter growing louder, echoing through the metal passageways. They emerged onto the rooftop and saw the moonlight shining down on the deserted town. They thought they were safe, but Huggy Wuggy appeared behind them, its eyes glowing with malice. It lunged at Sarah, who screamed as she was pulled into the darkness, her cries fading into silence. Jack and Emily knew they had to keep moving. They climbed down the fire escape ladder and ran through the empty streets, but Huggy Wuggy was relentless. It appeared around every corner, its laughter echoing in their ears. Finally, they reached Jack's house and bolted the door behind them. They huddled in the living room, trying to catch their breath. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and they heard a whisper, "You can't escape." Huggy Wuggy was in the house. Jack and Emily ran upstairs, but Huggy Wuggy was already waiting for them at the top of the stairs. Jack pushed Emily into a closet and shut the door, telling her to stay quiet. Jack faced Huggy Wuggy, knowing there was no way out. The toy's eyes gleamed with an evil light as it approached him. Jack felt a cold grip around his throat as Huggy Wuggy's arms tightened. His vision blurred, and the last thing he heard was Huggy Wuggy's chilling laughter. Emily stayed hidden in the closet, trembling with fear. She heard the sound of Jack's struggle, followed by silence. She waited for what felt like hours before cautiously opening the door. The house was silent, and Jack was gone. Only Huggy Wuggy remained, sitting on the floor, its grin wider than ever. The town was never the same after that night. The disappearances stopped, but the fear lingered. Huggy Wuggy was never seen again, but everyone knew that it was out there, waiting for its next victim. McDonald's was eventually shut down, and the building was abandoned. The legend of Huggy Wuggy became a cautionary tale, warning people to stay away from dark corners and never ignore the whispers in the shadows. In a small town where everyone knew everyone, and every street felt like home, there was an old park. The park had once been a bright and bustling place where parents took their children, but over the years it had been abandoned and forgotten. The swings creaked in the wind, the carousel stood still, and the air was filled with the spirit of times gone by. Among the rusty attractions and overgrown paths, one feature stood out, an old toy called Huggy Wuggy, which, they said, was cursed. Legend had it that unexplained disappearances once occurred in the park, and people linked them to this strange toy. But years passed, and the legend became nothing more than a scary tale for teenagers. One such teenager, Danny, was convinced that the whole story was just a fabrication and decided to prove it to his friends. They decided to spend the night in the park. On a Friday evening, Danny, along with Lisa, Tom, and Amy, sneaked into the park through a hole in the fence. The night was dark and cold, and the moon barely illuminated the abandoned attractions. The teenagers settled on an old bench, lit a campfire, and began telling each other scary stories. Soon, they remembered Huggy Wuggy and decided to find the toy. The park was a dark labyrinth of rusty structures and overgrown paths. After pushing through thick bushes, they came upon an old children's corner. In the center of this area stood a dilapidated playhouse, and inside, on a dusty table, sat Huggy Wuggy, a huge blue monster with a wide smile and enormous eyes. Lisa approached it and said with a smirk, "Look, it's just an old toy. Nothing scary." Suddenly, as soon as she touched the toy, all the lights in the park went out. The campfire extinguished, and darkness enveloped them. In the distance, a strange rustling sound could be heard. Tom suggested returning to the fire, but Danny insisted on staying and proving that it was all just silly fears. As they started to leave, Lisa noticed that Huggy Wuggy was no longer on the table. It was nowhere to be seen. Their hearts pounded faster, but they kept moving forward. Suddenly, they heard quiet, sinister laughter. The laughter grew louder, and soon they realized it was coming from all around them. The teenagers began to panic but decided to keep going, determined to find an exit. When they reached the old Ferris wheel, the lights went out again. In total darkness, they heard Amy scream. When the lights came back on, Amy was gone. Only her jacket and hat remained on the ground. Lisa started to cry, and Danny and Tom searched the area but found no trace of their friend. Only a shadow seemed to move in the distance. They realized they needed to leave the park immediately. But every exit they found was locked. They felt an evil presence surrounding them. Suddenly, Huggy Wuggy appeared before them, its eyes glowing bright red. Lisa screamed and ran but tripped and fell. Danny and Tom tried to help her up, but it was too late. The toy was right above her. Danny and Tom ran to an old carousel pavilion and barricaded the door behind them. Danny searched for an exit, while Tom tried to calm a trembling Lisa. Suddenly, an old radio they found in the corner crackled to life, and a quiet voice said, "You shouldn't have come here. Now you are mine." The pavilion door began to slowly open. Danny found a ventilation shaft and helped Lisa and Tom crawl inside. They crawled through the narrow ducts, feeling a chill behind them. Huggy Wuggy was close. Finally, they emerged onto the park's roof and ran to the edge. But, looking back, they saw Huggy Wuggy climbing onto the roof. Its footsteps echoed louder. Danny realized their only escape was to jump. He helped Tom and Lisa jump first but hesitated for a moment. Huggy Wuggy was already near. Tom and Lisa fell onto the grass and, despite the pain, began to run. They heard Danny scream but couldn't stop. They ran to the nearest house, but looking back, they saw that Huggy Wuggy wasn't chasing them. It just stood on the roof, its smile shining in the moonlight, its eyes gleaming with malice. Tom and Lisa reached the house and called the police. They told their story, but no one believed them. Danny and Amy were never found. The park was permanently closed, and city authorities decided to demolish it. But the legend of Huggy Wuggy lived on. Now, no one dared to approach the place, knowing that an evil spirit resided in its shadows, one that did not forgive those who dared to disturb its rest.